Hello, I'm Jenny. For years, my family treated me like an afterthought, mocking me, belittling me. But nothing could prepare me for the day my husband laughed when my family asked for a measly $300. That's when the bank revealed my $6.4 billion balance, and everything changed. What happened next will shock you. Stay with me because you won't believe how I took back control from those who tried to destroy me. Hook 2. Combined. Hello, I'm Jenny. For years, I was ignored, ridiculed, and taken advantage of by those I loved the most, especially by my husband, who mocked my family when they asked for $300. But then, everything shifted when the bank projected my 6.4B balance on screen. Suddenly, I wasn't the one left out. I was the one holding all the power. But the question is, how far did they go to tear me down? And what's next? Stick around to find out. The smell of roast chicken filled the air as Jenny sat quietly at the end of the dinner table, the warm glow of the kitchen light casting a soft hue over the room. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, just like all the other family dinners she'd hosted over the years. Yet tonight, something felt different. Something had been brewing under the surface for a long time, and she could feel it tightening in her chest, ready to burst. Her husband, Seth, was sitting at the head of the table, his usual smirk plastered across his face. The kids were eating, oblivious to the tension that hung in the air. Her parents, Richard and Helen, were busy conversing with each other, exchanging polite but distant words. Jenny didn't mind the quiet. She had learned over the years to accept it. It was the way her family operated, distant, detached, never really acknowledging her presence unless it was for something negative. She had spent the whole day organizing the house, making sure everything was perfect. She had been planning this dinner for weeks. This was supposed to be the time to connect, to be together, to bond. But she knew, deep down, that it would never go the way she hoped. "Dad, Mom," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "I need your help with something." Her parents barely looked up from their conversation. "What is it, honey?" her mother asked absent-mindedly. Jenny took a deep breath. She had never been good at asking for help, especially not from her family. But this time, she had no choice. Her son's school fees were due, and she didn't have the money to cover them. She had tried to manage on her own, but now she was out of options. "I need $300 for Noah's school fees," she said, trying to sound casual, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. "I don't have enough right now." Seth let out a loud laugh, his voice booming across the table. $300? You sure you don't want the whole $3,000, Jenny? His words were dripping with sarcasm. "Come on, you're always asking for something." The room fell silent for a moment. Jenny's heart dropped to her stomach. She could feel the eyes of everyone at the table turned toward her. The laughter was still echoing in her ears. She could almost hear the mocking tone in Seth's voice, and it stung. "Really, Seth?" Jenny muttered under her breath. Her face burned with embarrassment. Her parents, Richard and Helen, didn't seem to notice or care. They continued their conversation as if nothing had happened. Their silence was deafening. Jenny's mind began to race. She had never been the loud one in the family. She had always been the one who tried to keep the peace, the one who tried to be invisible. It was easier that way. If she didn't ask for too much, if she didn't rock the boat, maybe they'd love her just a little bit. But no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. She wasn't her sister, who had everything together, or her brother, who was the charming one. She was just Jenny, the one who faded into the background. Seth's laughter faded, but the sting of his words remained. The rest of the dinner continued as if nothing had happened, but Jenny could feel the weight of her humiliation pressing down on her chest. She had asked for something simple, something that should have been a normal request, but in her family it was met with ridicule. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the way they treated her, the way they made her feel small, invisible. Jenny's mind drifted back to her childhood. She remembered how her parents had always been so focused on her siblings. Her sister had always been the successful one, the one who achieved everything. And her brother, he was the popular one, the one everyone loved. Jenny had always been the afterthought, the invisible one, the one who never quite fit in. "Are you sure you don't want to just take the whole amount, Jenny?" Seth's voice cut through her thoughts. "Maybe you could sell your old things, huh? Maybe you could sell that worthless junk you have laying around the house." The laughter started up again, this time louder than before. Jenny felt like she was drowning in the noise, in the weight of their mockery. Her mind began to spiral. She wasn't enough. She wasn't good enough for her family. She had tried so hard for so long, but it was never enough. Every step she took forward was met with a step backward. No matter how much she gave, how much she sacrificed, it was never enough. She swallowed hard, trying to push the tears back. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ask. I'll figure it out." Seth rolled his eyes, clearly not caring. "Good luck with that," he muttered under his breath. The conversation continued around her, but Jenny didn't hear any of it. The laughter, the mockery, the indifference, all of it echoed in her mind. She felt like she was suffocating. As the evening wore on, Jenny's thoughts became a blur. She couldn't look at Seth anymore. She couldn't look at her parents. She couldn't even look at herself. She felt worthless, like nothing more than a joke in a room full of people who should have loved her. She quietly stood up from the table, her chair scraping across the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to get out of there, away from the laughter, away from the mocking. She couldn't breathe in that space anymore. She couldn't take it. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with the weight of it all. Not anymore. The house was eerily quiet when Jenny walked in, the faint sound of the door closing behind her, the only thing breaking the silence. She stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the evening sink in. The mocking laughter, Seth's dismissive tone, it all replayed in her mind like a broken record. She had tried to block it out at dinner, to pretend that everything was fine, but now that she was home, the sting of Seth's words felt even sharper. As she slipped off her shoes and made her way to the living room, Jenny couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that had followed her throughout the evening. Seth's words had been cutting, but it was the way her family had remained silent that had hurt the most. They had all turned their backs on her. Again. She was used to it, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Sitting on the edge of the couch, she hugged her knees to her chest, staring blankly at the walls. Her thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of everything. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. The years of neglect, the constant undermining of her worth, and the growing realization that she had never truly been a priority in her own family. Her mind wandered back to the dinner table, to Seth's smirk as he belittled her. She could feel the shame rising again, but now there was something else, something deeper. Anger. Frustration. The familiar feelings of powerlessness she had carried for years had suddenly morphed into a desire for change. "I can't keep living like this," she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers gripped the edge of the couch, the urge to escape everything growing stronger with each passing second. But Jenny knew that running away wasn't the answer. She had to face it, all of it, head on. Trying to distract herself, Jenny began to go through some papers that had been left on the kitchen counter earlier in the day. Financial statements, bills. She started skimming through the documents, her mind still heavy with everything that had happened. She needed clarity, something to take her mind off the sting of Seth's mockery. But as her eyes scanned the papers, something caught her attention. A large, unexplained withdrawal, right there on the family account. It was linked to Seth's name. Jenny's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. She double-checked the numbers, certain that there had to be a mistake, but there it was, a significant amount of money withdrawn. And it wasn't the first time. Her stomach dropped. Seth had been hiding something from her. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. His control over their finances had always been subtle, but this was something else. She felt a tightness in her chest as she flipped through more papers, each one revealing more discrepancies. Large sums of money had been moved without her knowledge, transfers from their joint accounts to places she didn't recognize. Jenny's hands began to shake as the realization hit her. He had been hiding this from her. For how long? Years, maybe. How could she have been so blind? The mockery at dinner was nothing compared to this betrayal. Seth's manipulation ran deeper than she had ever imagined. He wasn't just belittling her at the table. He was controlling their lives, keeping her in the dark about their financial future, their shared responsibilities. A cold wave of disbelief washed over her. She had trusted him. She had believed in their marriage, in the idea that they were partners, but now she wasn't sure who he even was. Her mind started to race. How could he do this to her? How could he treat her like this for all these years? As she continued to review the financial statements, Jenny felt a storm brewing inside her. This was no longer about a small request for $300. This was about everything. The constant manipulation, the gaslighting, the disregard for her needs, her feelings. It was all part of the same web of control that had kept her locked in this marriage. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rush of anger. The emotional weight of it all, the mockery, the lies, the deceit, was too much to bear. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, she sat there in stunned silence, trying to catch her breath. Seth's actions had been calculated, cold, and now she saw them for what they truly were, an ongoing effort to break her down, to make her feel small, unworthy. Her mind churned with thoughts of what to do next. For a brief moment, Jenny considered confronting him immediately, but then a different thought crept into her mind. Confrontation wouldn't be enough. She needed to take back control. This wasn't just about getting him to admit what he'd done. It was about reclaiming her life, her power. Jenny's heart raced as she made a decision. She couldn't go on living like this. She wouldn't let Seth's actions define her anymore. She sat quietly, the documents spread out in front of her. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity. The decision to take control was now undeniable. But before she could gather her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She froze. A message from Seth. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. What could he possibly want now? She opened the message. "We need to talk." Jenny stared at the message, a mix of dread and resolve bubbling inside her. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't ready for it. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. She couldn't keep avoiding him forever. The confrontation was coming, whether she was ready or not. The quiet hum of the cafe did little to soothe Jenny as she sat at the corner table, waiting for Clara to arrive. It was mid-morning, a few days after the bombshell discovery of Seth's financial secrets, and Jenny's mind was still a whirlwind. She couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened, the mockery, the lies, and now this. She needed someone to talk to, someone outside of the chaos of her own home, someone who could offer perspective. Clara was that someone. Jenny glanced out the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her coffee cup. The streets outside were calm, but inside her, it felt like a storm was brewing, relentless and unforgiving. Her chest tightened, and the memories of the family dinner and Seth's dismissive laugh returned. It wasn't just about the $300 anymore, it was about everything. She had been living in the shadows of Seth's dominance for so long, and now, for the first time, she was beginning to see the full extent of his control. Clara arrived a few minutes later, her calm presence a welcome relief. She slid into the chair across from Jenny with a warm smile, her dark eyes immediately sensing the turmoil in her friend's expression. "Tell me everything," Clara said softly, her voice steady, always the calm to Jenny's storm. Jenny exhaled sharply, her voice trembling as she began to recount the events of the dinner. "He mocked me, Clara. In front of everyone. My own family. They just sat there. It was like they didn't even care." Clara listened without interruption, her eyes fixed on Jenny. She didn't need to say much. Jenny's words spoke for themselves. Jenny had always been the one who tried to keep the peace, to hold things together, but it had never been enough, not for Seth, not for her family. When Jenny finished, Clara took a deep breath, leaning forward. "You know this isn't just about the money, right? This is about control. Seth has been undermining you for years, and now it's like it's all coming to a head." Jenny felt a rush of emotions, sadness, anger, disbelief. Clara was right. It was never just about the money. It was about Seth's constant need to make her feel small, insignificant. His mockery at the dinner was the culmination of years of emotional neglect, of being overlooked and dismissed. But it was also something deeper. Jenny realized, with a shock, that she had allowed it to happen. She had allowed herself to be gaslighted, to believe that she didn't deserve better. Clara's voice pulled her out of her spiraling thoughts. Jenny, you've been quiet for far too long. You can't keep living like this. You need to stand up for yourself. You deserve better. Jenny's heart hammered in her chest. But what if confronting him just makes things worse? What if I lose everything? Clara placed a hand on Jenny's, her grip firm but kind. You're already losing everything by staying silent. You've been losing yourself for years. This is your chance to take control. It's not just about confronting Seth, it's about reclaiming your life. And you don't have to do it alone. Jenny sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The idea of standing up to Seth, of confronting him directly, was terrifying. She had never been the one to raise her voice in the family, but Clara's words sparked something inside her. A small flame of defiance began to grow, igniting a sense of clarity that Jenny hadn't felt in years. She could no longer be a passive participant in her own life. She had to act. I'm done being silent, Jenny whispered, more to herself than to Clara. It's time to stop hiding. The conversation with Clara lingered in Jenny's mind as she walked out of the cafe. The cold morning air hit her face, but it did little to clear the fog in her mind. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could change her situation. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't invisible. She was stronger than she had ever realized. Jenny found a park bench and sat down, letting the stillness of the moment wash over her. Her fingers tightened around the papers she had kept hidden in her purse, the financial statements, the evidence of Seth's betrayal. The gravity of it all sank in as she sat there, contemplating the next steps. She thought about everything that had led to this point, the years of silence, the moments when she had let Seth's words dictate her worth. But now, in the quiet of the park, Jenny knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living this way. For the first time, Jenny saw a future that wasn't dictated by Seth's manipulation. A future where she had control over her own life. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Fighting back didn't mean losing everything. It meant gaining her autonomy, her dignity. Jenny took a deep breath, her resolve firming. She wouldn't be a doormat anymore. She would stand up for herself, no matter the cost. That evening, Jenny spent hours preparing for what was to come. She sat at the kitchen table, jotting down notes, organizing her thoughts, and reviewing the financial documents she had uncovered. This wasn't going to be an emotional confrontation, it was going to be strategic. Jenny knew she had to approach Seth with logic, with facts, because she wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. She practiced what she would say, how she would present the evidence. She rehearsed in front of the mirror, making sure her voice didn't waver. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Jenny knew the confrontation would be difficult. Seth wasn't going to back down without a fight. But she was done being passive. She was ready for the battle. As she finished preparing for the conversation, Jenny's phone buzzed on the table. She stared at the screen for a moment, her heart racing. It was a message from Seth. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Jenny's breath hitched as she stared at the message. This was it. The confrontation was coming, and she wasn't going to back down. She took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and began to type her response. I'm ready. Jenny sat alone in the living room, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the message from Seth. His words echoed in her mind, each syllable stoking the fire of her anger and fear. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. She knew the time had come. She couldn't back out now. This was her moment, the moment she'd been preparing for ever since she'd uncovered the truth about his lies and manipulation. But still, doubt gnawed at her. Her fingers trembled as she put the phone down on the coffee table, looking around the room for something to steady her thoughts. She had practiced what she would say 100 times in her head, but now that the moment was here, the words felt hollow. She had been ignored and humiliated for too long. But now, there was no turning back. Jenny stood up and walked over to the desk where she had laid out the documents, the financial statements, the evidence of Seth's deception. She had carefully reviewed them over and over, memorizing the figures and the dates, the transactions that proved Seth had been hiding money from her. The very idea that she had been so blind, so trusting, sickened her. She ran a hand through her hair, the weight of everything crashing down on her. What if Seth tried to manipulate her again? What if he convinced her that she was overreacting, that she was the one to blame for all of this? She had to be strong. She couldn't let him control her anymore. Jenny took a deep breath and sat back down at the table, the papers in front of her, her mind sharp with determination. She had spent years tiptoeing around Seth's moods, pretending everything was fine. But that was over now. The anger inside her was simmering, and she could feel her courage building. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect, about her own sense of self-worth. She wasn't just a passive victim in her own life anymore. As she waited for Seth, Jenny reflected on how she'd gotten here. Years of swallowing her feelings, of letting Seth get away with everything. But no more. This time, she was going to take control. The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence of the house. Jenny's breath hitched. This was it. She stood up, smoothing her clothes, trying to steady her nerves. She opened the door to find Seth standing there, his expression unreadable. "Hi," he said, his tone casual, but with an undercurrent of defensiveness. He knew something was off. The walls between them had always been fragile, but now it felt like they were cracking. "Come in," Jenny said, stepping aside. Her voice was calm, but her heart was pounding in her chest. Seth walked into the living room and sat down across from her at the table, not saying a word. Jenny could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. She wasn't going to waste time with small talk. She needed to get straight to the point. "I've been going over the financial statements," Jenny began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "And I found some discrepancies, a lot of money being moved around, and I never knew about it." Seth's eyes flickered for a second, but he quickly masked it with a shrug. "It's probably just a misunderstanding, Jenny. You know how complicated these things can get." Jenny didn't flinch. She had expected this. Seth always tried to brush things off, to downplay his actions like they were nothing. But Jenny wasn't buying it anymore. "No, Seth," she said, her voice firm. "It's not a misunderstanding. There are large withdrawals, thousands of dollars, moving between accounts without any explanation. And you've never told me about it. Why?" Seth shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "You're overreacting. I've got things under control. I don't need you questioning everything." Jenny's heart raced with frustration. He was trying to deflect again, to make her feel like she was the problem, but this time, she wasn't going to let him. "I'm not overreacting," Jenny said, her voice getting sharper. "You've been hiding things from me for years, Seth, and I'm done pretending I don't see it. This isn't just about money. It's about the lies, the manipulation, the way you've treated me like I'm nothing." Seth's face twisted with irritation, and he leaned forward, his voice rising. "You don't understand, Jenny. You never have. It's not as simple as you think. There are things I've had to do to keep us afloat, and you—" "No," Jenny interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've had enough of your excuses. You've always made me feel small, Seth. I've spent years wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. But it wasn't me. It was you. And I'm done letting you treat me like this." Seth's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he looked like he was going to say something else. But Jenny didn't wait for him to finish. She stood up, pushing the papers towards him. "Look at these," she said, her voice steady but loud enough to carry the weight of her words. "You've been playing me for far too long. This isn't just about money. This is about respect. You've taken so much from me, Seth, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Seth opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like he didn't know what to say. Jenny had finally called his bluff, and for the first time, he was speechless. Jenny took a deep breath and stood tall. "I'm done, Seth. I'm done being scared. I'm done being your punching bag. You don't get to control me anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Seth didn't say a word, his mouth slightly agape. Jenny's resolve only grew stronger in that moment. She had faced the truth, and she wasn't backing down. "I want a divorce," Jenny said, her voice clear and unshakable. "This marriage is over." Seth's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You're just going to throw everything away?" He stood up, his voice rising with anger. "This is ridiculous, Jenny. You don't know what you're doing." Jenny didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Seth stood there for a moment, staring at her, his face a mix of anger and confusion. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house. Jenny watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time, it wasn't fear she felt. It was relief. She took a deep breath and looked out the window, the weight of the decision settling in. This was her life now, her choice, and for the first time in years, she felt free. Jenny sat at her desk, papers strewn in front of her, a cold cup of coffee sitting untouched beside her. It was late morning, and though the sun streamed through the window, she couldn't shake the heaviness inside. The anger from the previous days still simmered beneath her skin, but there was a new feeling too, a growing sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. No, this time she was taking control. Her mind drifted back to the night she'd left Seth. The words she had spoken, "It's over," still rang in her ears, but they weren't words of defeat anymore. They had been the first step toward her freedom. She wasn't going to let him define her anymore. She wasn't going to let her past dictate her future. Jenny's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the financial papers again. The numbers on the page were no longer just numbers. They were proof of the betrayal she had endured for far too long. Seth's secret dealings, his manipulation, had kept her in the dark for years, but now she was seeing it all clearly. And with that clarity came a power she hadn't felt in years. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. For so long, she had allowed herself to be treated as less than. Her childhood had been one long lesson in invisibility, her voice always drowned out by others. But not anymore. The woman she had become was stronger, smarter, and she was going to make sure Seth and everyone else knew that. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. She stared at it for a moment, a surge of annoyance rising in her chest as she saw the name on the screen. Seth. Her finger hovered over the screen before she answered. The phone call was brief. Seth's voice oozed with his usual charm, the same manipulative tone that used to weaken her. "We need to talk, Jenny. This isn't what you think." But Jenny wasn't buying it anymore. She didn't even hesitate before she said, "It's over, Seth. You're not part of my future anymore." She didn't give him a chance to respond, hanging up the phone and feeling a finality wash over her. This was it. There was no turning back. Jenny took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. Her phone was still warm in her hand, but she felt a strange peace in the aftermath of the conversation. For once, she wasn't scared of what would come next. She was ready. That afternoon, Jenny sat across from a lawyer, her heart steady. She had made an appointment earlier that morning after deciding it was time to secure her future, to make sure she was never dependent on Seth or anyone else again. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, listened closely as Jenny detailed everything: the financial discrepancies, Seth's deceit, and the long history of emotional manipulation. The lawyer didn't interrupt, only nodded, her expression serious. "You're in a strong position," she said after a moment. "With the right steps, you'll get what's rightfully yours." Jenny's fingers drummed lightly on the table as she absorbed the weight of the conversation. For the first time in a long time, she felt like the decisions she made mattered. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was taking control. As the lawyer went over the legal options available to her, Jenny felt a sense of empowerment surge through her. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Seth wasn't going to let her go without a fight, but she wasn't scared anymore. She was ready to fight back. Later that evening, Jenny met her friend Anna for coffee. The cafe was warm, the chatter of other patrons filling the background as Anna listened intently. Jenny felt a weight lift off her chest as she spoke about the changes she was making in her life. For the first time in years, she felt like she was on solid ground. "You've done the right thing, Jenny," Anna said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I've watched you struggle for so long. You're finally standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you." Jenny smiled, the compliment settling deep within her. She'd never felt prouder of herself than she did in that moment. She was no longer a doormat. She was a woman who was fighting for her future. The next morning, Jenny sat down at her desk again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. She had been making the necessary calls all week, ensuring that she was taking all the right steps to protect herself. But as she looked at the bank statements again, something caught her eye: a large, unauthorized transfer of funds. Her heart sank as she realized what this meant. Seth hadn't just taken money from their joint accounts. He'd been moving funds into accounts that weren't even in his name. It was another attempt to control her, to keep her from gaining full access to her own life. But this time, she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Jenny's stomach churned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had thought she had already uncovered everything. She had thought she was in control. But Seth had managed to slip through her fingers yet again. But not this time. She grabbed her phone and dialed the bank manager, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. "I need to speak with someone about a fraudulent transaction on my account," she said, her voice calm but firm. An hour later, Jenny sat back in her chair, a grim sense of determination setting in. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. As she sat alone in her living room, she realized that every action she took, every step she made, was moving her closer to the life she had always dreamed of. A life where she was in control. A life where she wouldn't be manipulated or ignored anymore. Jenny picked up the phone and dialed once more. She wasn't done yet. She was only just getting started. Jenny's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. "There's been a transfer from your account. Call me immediately." Jenny stood up, her fingers tight around the phone. Her confidence wavered for just a moment, but she steadied herself. This wasn't the end. It was just another hurdle, and she was ready to leap over it. Jenny stared at the phone, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The call from her lawyer had been short, but the news was undeniable. Seth had crossed another line, and this time, Jenny wasn't going to let it slide. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of it all settled in. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust. This was about her life, her future, and most of all, her freedom. She stood in her apartment, looking out the window at the busy street below. The city felt so distant now, like she was disconnected from everything outside. The emotions from the past few days, anger, betrayal, confusion, still raged inside her. But now, something else had begun to rise. Clarity. She had done everything in her power to be patient, to be understanding, but this was it. She could no longer afford to be passive. The feeling of being manipulated, of being made small for so long, was finally beginning to feel like a distant memory. Jenny wasn't the same woman who had walked into that marriage. She wasn't the same woman who had spent years suffocating under the weight of someone else's control. The person standing in this apartment now was determined, empowered, and ready to take what was rightfully hers. She sat down at her desk, the documents still scattered across it, the financial records, the trust fund details, and all the other pieces of her past that she had once ignored now served as ammunition. She picked up the phone, her fingers shaking only slightly as she dialed her lawyer. "It's time," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions running through her. "I want to move forward. We're not letting him get away with this." Her lawyer's voice on the other end was calm, but the support was evident. Jenny hung up the phone, her mind made up. This was no longer about fixing things or saving face. This was about taking control of her life and claiming what she deserved. A few hours later, Jenny stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse. She had agreed to meet Seth at a neutral location. No more running away, no more hiding. She couldn't keep pretending that everything would work itself out. It was time to confront him, to stand her ground. She wasn't going to be intimidated by his charm or his manipulation anymore. When Seth arrived at the cafe, he looked almost too calm, his expression unreadable. Jenny could see right through him now, his confidence, his arrogance. None of it would work on her anymore. She had come too far. He sat down across from her, looking as if he expected a casual conversation. "Jenny, I don't know why you're making this so difficult. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Jenny didn't flinch. She folded her arms and met his gaze, her voice clear and unwavering. "No, Seth. You didn't mean to hurt me. You meant to control me, to keep me in the dark. I'm not doing this anymore." His face faltered, but only for a moment. "This is how you want to end things. We were a team, Jenny." She leaned in, her voice low but firm. "We were never a team. You had the reins, and I was just your pawn." She pulled out the documents, placing them on the table between them. "This is what you've been hiding from me. And now, I'm taking control." Seth's eyes flickered with annoyance, but he tried to recover. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting. Jenny shook her head. I'm not overreacting, Seth. I'm finally seeing the truth. And I'm not letting you manipulate me anymore. You don't get to control me. The air between them thickened, and for a moment, Seth seemed to lose his composure. His voice dropped, trying to appeal to her. Jenny, don't do this. If you walk away from me, we'll both lose everything. But Jenny's resolve was unshakable now. She stood up, her eyes cold. You already took everything from me, Seth. I'm not going to let you take any more. Seth sat back, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. But Jenny wasn't finished. I'm filing for a divorce. I'm taking legal action, and you will never have access to my assets again. If you try, I'll make sure you pay for every single thing you've done. She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned and walked out, her heart pounding, but her shoulders squared with newfound strength. The next morning, Jenny found herself sitting in her lawyer's office, her fingers nervously drumming on the table. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for was finally here. The lawyer walked in, carrying a folder filled with papers. You're doing the right thing, Jenny, the lawyer said. We'll file for the injunction today. You've got a good case here. Jenny felt a surge of relief. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a stand for herself, for her future. She wasn't going to let Seth or anyone keep her from living the life she deserved. As she walked out of the lawyer's office, Jenny couldn't help but feel a sense of power surge through her. She wasn't the passive woman who had walked into this mess. She was someone who had taken control and was ready to face whatever came next. Later that evening, Jenny found herself sitting at a family dinner, her mind sharp despite the awkward tension in the air. Her parents were there, along with her sister Vanessa. The conversation was strained, and it was clear that Jenny's newfound strength was unsettling to them. Vanessa, always the skeptic, took the opportunity to criticize Jenny's choices. Do you really think leaving Seth was the answer? You've been through worse, Jenny. This is just over the top. Jenny, without hesitation, met her sister's gaze. I'm not your punching bag anymore, Vanessa. I'm done letting everyone walk all over me. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. It wasn't just Seth she was standing up to anymore. It was everyone who had ever underestimated her. Vanessa was silent, clearly taken aback. For the first time, Jenny didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. As Jenny left the dinner, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her lawyer. The news was unexpected. Seth had been involved in further financial activities that would destroy his credibility and could end his ability to manipulate Jenny. Her heart raced as the implications hit her. This could be the final blow to Seth. She wasn't sure what this meant for her future, but she knew one thing: it was time to finish this once and for all. Jenny took a deep breath, her hands gripping the phone tightly. This was it. The final step. Jenny sat in her lawyer's office, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. She looked over the documents, her heart beating with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The past few months had been a whirlwind, full of highs and lows, revelations and betrayals. But now, with the final hearing looming just hours away, the end was in sight. Her lawyer had been supportive throughout, explaining the steps of the case and offering her practical advice on how to approach the final decision. But Jenny knew that tomorrow was not just another step in the process. Tomorrow, it would all be decided. The settlement, her future, everything. She had spent years in the shadows, too afraid to speak up, too conditioned to believe that she deserved less. But not anymore. The past was behind her, and today was the day she would prove it. As her lawyer detailed the legal strategies they would use to freeze Seth's assets and protect her own, Jenny found herself absorbing every word, but the message that lingered in her mind was clearer than anything her lawyer had said. This wasn't just about money. It was about taking back her life, about reclaiming her dignity and her future. It was about standing up for herself. Twist S17. The more Jenny heard the legal steps laid out for her, the more confident she became. She was no longer worried about what would happen next. She knew she had what it took to take control. Later that day, Jenny found herself standing outside the courtroom, her heart pounding. The day had arrived, and this was her moment. She straightened her back, adjusted her suit, and walked in. Seth was already there, sitting with his lawyer, a smug look plastered on his face. He had always thought he was untouchable, that he had the power to control everything in their relationship. Today, though, that was going to change. The courtroom was packed, and the air felt thick with tension. Jenny could feel the stares on her, the whispers, but she didn't flinch. She was here for one reason: to be heard. Seth's lawyer started the proceedings, trying to paint Jenny as unstable, accusing her of blowing things out of proportion, of overreacting to everything. It was a classic tactic. But Jenny stood tall, knowing exactly what was at stake. Her lawyer presented the evidence: Seth's financial manipulations, the hidden accounts, the lies. Jenny's turn came, and she walked up to the witness stand. As she spoke, recounting the years of manipulation, of being ignored, of being dismissed as nothing more than a pawn in Seth's game, something inside her shifted. Twist S18. The moment she spoke those words, "I was just your pawn," it wasn't just a courtroom testimony. It was an emotional release. Jenny felt the years of silence, of being small, evaporate. This was her moment of liberation. As Jenny finished her statement, she felt the courtroom go silent. Seth's lawyer had no retort. Jenny had spoken with a strength that surprised even her. This was the moment when everything changed. Seth's smug confidence began to slip away, and for the first time, Jenny wasn't invisible. She wasn't the victim. She was in control. But just as the case seemed to be coming to a close, a piece of critical evidence was revealed: a hidden bank account Seth had set up in Jenny's name, draining money without her knowledge. The room went still, and Jenny's heart raced as she watched Seth's face fall. Twist S19. The final twist came when Jenny realized that she had turned the tables. She wasn't the one scrambling to prove her worth. Seth was. The evidence had shattered his defense, and now it was all out in the open. Seth tried to deny everything, but the truth was undeniable. The judge looked at the evidence, then at Jenny, and finally made the ruling. The judge's decision was clear. Seth's assets were frozen, and Jenny was granted full control of her finances, along with a substantial settlement. Jenny could hardly believe it. The years of waiting, the years of being silenced, had culminated in this moment. She wasn't just walking out of the courtroom with money. She was walking out with her freedom. Twist S20. Despite her victory, Jenny knew that healing would take time. The scars of her past wouldn't disappear overnight, but the battle was over. She was no longer a victim. She had fought back and won. As she walked out of the courthouse, a wave of relief washed over her. The world seemed different now. She could breathe easier. The future was hers to shape. Later that evening, as Jenny headed home, she received an unexpected call from a mutual acquaintance of hers and Seth's. The voice on the other end was urgent, shaking. "Jenny, I don't know if you know this, but Seth's actions run deeper than you think. There are people who don't want to see you succeed. He's got more in the works, things you haven't even discovered yet." Jenny's stomach dropped. She had thought that her battle was over, but now it seemed like the real fight had just begun. Her resolve hardened. She was ready. If Seth thought this was over, he was wrong. Jenny hung up the phone, her mind racing. She had won today, but tomorrow was a new challenge, and she wasn't backing down. Jenny woke up with the sun barely peeking through the curtains. The weight of the upcoming day felt heavier than anything she had experienced before, but this time there was no fear, only determination. The phone call from Chapter 7 still echoed in her mind, the reminder that Seth's schemes ran deeper than she'd ever realized. But she wasn't about to back down. She had come too far. She looked at the clock, the time ticking away, but she didn't rush. The battle for her freedom was near, and today was the day she'd take control. Sitting at the kitchen table, she brewed a strong cup of coffee and stared at the legal documents in front of her. Each page told a story of betrayal, manipulation, and lies. But these pages were also her weapon now. She was ready to use them. Jenny thought back to the moments that had shaped her, the silent suffering, the years spent under Seth's control, and the endless second-guessing. The woman who had once shrunk in his shadow no longer existed. This was her time. The woman who stood before the legal system today wasn't the same woman who had walked into her lawyer's office months ago. This woman was strong, unyielding. Twist S21. As she reviewed the evidence, a realization hit her. This wasn't just a financial battle. This wasn't about money or assets or even revenge. It was a war against the fear that had haunted her for so long. This was about her life, her worth. It was time to claim it. The conference room was cold. Too cold. Jenny could feel her heart beating in her chest as she walked in. The case was about to begin, and Seth was sitting across the table from her, as smug as ever, his lawyer beside him. He looked up when Jenny entered, the arrogance never leaving his face. But this time, Jenny wasn't intimidated. She was ready. The opening argument started with Seth's lawyer attempting to undermine Jenny's credibility, painting her as the emotional one who couldn't handle the stress of their marriage. Jenny clenched her fists under the table, but she stayed calm. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. When it was her turn to speak, Jenny stood up and faced the room. The evidence she had, documents, recordings, witnesses, was irrefutable. She didn't need to cry or beg for sympathy. She spoke clearly and confidently, explaining how Seth had manipulated her for years, using her trust and love as leverage to control everything. Seth tried to deflect. He tried to twist the narrative, accusing her of being unreasonable. "We built something together," he said, his voice laced with a tone of victimhood. "You're throwing it all away." Jenny's response was simple. "We never built anything together, Seth. I was just your pawn." Her words landed with a sharpness she hadn't known she was capable of. Twist S22. In that moment, Jenny realized she wasn't just fighting for financial gain. She was fighting to be seen, to be heard, to finally have her truth acknowledged. But just as things seemed to be progressing, Jenny's lawyer presented a critical piece of evidence. A hidden bank account Seth had set up under Jenny's name, siphoning off large amounts of money over the years. The room fell silent. Seth's smug expression faltered for the first time. Jenny's heart raced, but this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with power. She had him. After all the years of feeling small, of feeling insignificant, this was the moment she had been waiting for. Twist S23. Seth's world, his carefully constructed lies, began to crumble as the courtroom absorbed the truth. The roles had reversed. He was no longer in control. Jenny was. Seth's last-ditch attempt to salvage his image came with an accusation. "You're trying to destroy everything we built. You're doing this for revenge." His voice grew louder, desperate. Jenny remained calm, her eyes fixed on him. "No, Seth," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't about revenge. This is about finally standing up for myself." She then turned to the court, her closing argument a direct appeal not just for herself, but for all the women who had been silenced by manipulative, controlling partners. She wasn't just taking back what was hers, she was reclaiming her dignity, her freedom, her future. Twist S24. In a final, decisive moment, Jenny turned to Seth, her gaze unwavering. "You no longer have control over me," she said, her words striking deep. Seth's face showed a flicker of realization. He had lost. Jenny had won. As the judge deliberated, Jenny felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had faced him, stood her ground, and won. And no matter what happened next, no one could take this victory away from her. When the judge returned with the ruling, Jenny felt the weight of his words. Seth's assets were frozen, and Jenny had full control over her finances. The settlement was substantial, but it was the emotional victory that meant the most. Jenny walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, feeling a relief she hadn't thought possible. She was free. Finally. But as she stepped into the sunlight, a phone call shattered her moment of peace. It was from a mysterious source, someone who claimed to know about Seth's deeper connections that could still put her at risk. Jenny's heart skipped a beat. Was this just the beginning? The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Jenny with a new sense of urgency. She had won today, but the war wasn't over. There were still forces at play, and they weren't going to back down. Last line of Chapter 8. The phone call hung in the air, the silence louder than any words. Jenny stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. The city stretched out before her, a symbol of endless possibility. It had been weeks since the courtroom drama, the whirlwind of emotions, and the final, liberating verdict. She thought back to the person she used to be, shy, unsure, constantly second-guessing herself. That woman was no longer here. She had fought, and she had won, but there was still a lingering heaviness in her chest. The emotional aftermath of everything was real. The scars remained, but they no longer defined her. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the stillness. The world outside seemed calm, and in many ways, so did she. But deep down, Jenny knew healing would take time. Her heart had been battered for too long, and while the court ruling gave her the freedom she so desperately wanted, it wasn't an instant cure for the wounds of the past. She smiled faintly as she thought about how far she'd come. She wasn't just free from Seth. She was free from the fear and manipulation that had held her captive for years. That was her true victory. Twist S25. The power she sought in her life had never truly been about money or assets. It had always been about taking ownership of her story and stepping into the light. The past had no hold on her anymore. Jenny spent her days in quiet reflection, rebuilding her life in ways she never imagined. The emotional healing began in small, subtle ways, reconnecting with friends, rediscovering her passions, and most importantly, prioritizing her mental well-being. Yoga became her sanctuary, something she never thought she would enjoy but quickly found peace in. She began traveling again, rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under years of living for someone else. She set boundaries, firm ones, with people in her life, family, friends, anyone who tried to pull her back into old patterns. She realized how much of her life had been spent appeasing others, neglecting her own needs. That was over. Twist S26. But there was a moment of vulnerability she couldn't deny. Jenny had always been afraid of being too comfortable, of settling. She feared that the very independence she fought for might leave her feeling alone, adrift. Yet, the more she embraced it, the more she realized that independence wasn't a prison. It was a freedom she had never truly understood until now. One afternoon, as Jenny sat at a cafe, she took out her phone and sent a message to her estranged sibling, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. It was Seth's doing, the lies, the manipulation, the isolation. But this wasn't about Seth anymore. This was about healing, and that started with her. Her heart raced as she hit send, but the reply came quickly. A simple, "Let's talk." Their conversation was emotional. Jenny found herself crying for the first time in years, not out of anger, but relief. The walls between them slowly crumbled as they talked openly about their shared pain, their past, and the brokenness that Seth had caused. This was the beginning of something Jenny hadn't even known she needed: reconnection. Her parents, too, acknowledged their failings. The realization was humbling, but also healing. They weren't perfect, but for the first time, they recognized her strength. Jenny had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers, and now she could see her parents as flawed, yet loving. Twist S27. As the weeks passed, Jenny heard news about Seth. He was spiraling, consumed by the aftermath of the legal battle. But Jenny felt no satisfaction in his downfall. She had never wanted to destroy him. She had wanted to rebuild herself. That victory was hers, and his failure was nothing but a hollow echo in her life. The decision to move forward became more than just a thought. It became a necessity. Jenny took steps to reshape her future. She enrolled in a course on entrepreneurship, something she had always wanted to explore. The idea of starting something on her own, creating something that was entirely hers, felt exhilarating. She began outlining the concepts for a book, one that might one day share her journey with others who had felt lost, manipulated, and unseen. She was no longer just surviving, she was planning, creating, and evolving. Twist S28. Just as Jenny was preparing to finally let go of the past, she received an unexpected message from Seth's lawyer, a settlement offer that she could easily accept. For a moment, the temptation was real. Could she take the money and finally close the chapter? It would be easy, but that wasn't the point anymore. The settlement didn't represent closure, it represented more of the same. Jenny had spent too long waiting for others to validate her. She no longer needed Seth's money. She needed nothing from him. She rejected the offer. She wasn't going to let him have one last piece of her life. The power was hers now. As she sat back, the weight of the last few years slowly lifted off her shoulders. The future ahead of her was unknown, but it was hers to shape. She felt free, not because she had escaped, but because she had learned to live life on her own terms. The phone rang, the sound slicing through the stillness of the room. Jenny stared at the screen, the number unfamiliar. She took a deep breath. It was time to see what the future held. Her heart raced, but this time it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Last line of chapter 9. Now I am free, not because I've escaped, but because I've learned to live life on my own terms.